So we're here with Vivek Kundra, and I want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Vivek is currently the Executive Vice President for Industries with Salesforce.com. Now you're in Salesforce, and in many ways you're living a lot of the things that you were talking about as a CIO. We've got a very strong cloud platform, a lot of applications, a lot of innovation being built on top of that. What were you able to take from your CIO times and the knowledge and experience that you had gained there to really bring something new to the role that you're in now?
So actually, after the White House, I went on a fellowship and it reflected on what is the future of computing, where is society headed. And what was really, really interesting about that is that Salesforce.com as a company is at the vanguard of that around this third wave of computing. So I thought a lot about what was going on in the 1960s, where you had nation states or capitals around the world that could afford really, really expensive mainframes and mini computers and SNN networks. And you had thousands of users that were on those networks. And that was sort of the first wave of computing. And then you move into the 1980s, and you suddenly get this second wave of computing with client-server environments and LAN-WAN networks, and you get millions of users on these networks. But what's so exciting, and one of the reasons I think this third wave of computing is going to disrupt every major industry and country for that matter, is because in this third wave with cloud, social, mobile, LTE networks, all of a sudden, if you reflect on that, you and I, with our mobile device, have more power in our hands than world leaders did a couple of years ago. Right? The ability to ask and get an answer to virtually any question, the ability to click on a button and you could have a car show up to pick you up, the ability to control your thermostat from this mobile device, no matter where you live on the planet, the ability to instrument your health, the ability to actually connect with people all over the world. It's so transformative, and what you're seeing is something that we haven't seen for over 100 years when it comes to this shift in technology. And what's really, really interesting about that, though, by the way, is that it's not just a function of the technology, but it's these twin forces around globalization and this third wave of computing that's going to transform every company, every government that we know of.
It certainly has gotten momentum over the past few years. I mean, initially cloud was something that, particularly in the government sector, was viewed with a bit of suspicion and a lot of fear and a lot of concern about change and a lot of concern about reworking the structures that were working, for better or worse. Do you think that we are well and truly past that by now? Is cloud in the public sector to the point where it has the legitimacy that it should, or do we need to continue?
Well, you just have to go back to the mid-90s, right? And if you remember in the mid-90s, a lot of people were complaining about or worried about launching a website. Mm-hmm. Right? In the United States, for example, it took the vice president of the U.S. to actually force every government agency to launch a website, right? But it's a one-way street. Mm-hmm. So the question isn't, will governments move to the cloud or not? I think that's an irrelevant question. That's happening. We're seeing that happen, amazing work happening in New South Wales, where I had the opportunity to go to Sydney and visit one of the New South Wales service centers. And what was phenomenal, and I think it's the model for the country to look at, is not only were they using cloud technologies to abstract government, they focused and put the citizen at the heart of government operations. So you literally walk in this service center and you're greeted by somebody and they are asking you, would you like a driver's license? Do you need a birth certificate? Do you need a healthcare card? That is the future of government. And the leadership in New South Wales is setting the example for the rest of Australia and, for that matter, the rest of the world. And what I'm excited about is the fact that when I went there, it wasn't just they changed and focused on technology, but they also focused on the customer experience. And one of the things they did, which I thought was really, really interesting, is they recruited people from the hospitality industry. So they went and recruited people from whether it was hotels or banks, and they made sure that as a citizen, when you walked in, your experience is not what most people would think of when they go into a government office, right? They characterize that as, well, we're waiting in line, I was holding on the phone, or they asked me to send in a 3-part fax, right? This was 21st century government at the same time using cloud technologies to simplify the citizen experience.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because that mentality could always have been there, and that ability to do that could always have been there. Government didn't have to be the way that it was, but it's taken really a fresh look at itself and been able to do that sort of customer service mentality and that focus that really is defining government now. Do you think that there's still a lot of people that are reluctant to do that, a lot of government organizations that are still struggling?
Well, it all begins with leadership, right? So I think the real lesson to learn is what about the leaders in New South Wales sets everybody else apart, right? Because ultimately what I'm super excited about is the fact that technology now isn't just in the province of the high-tech industry, but it's beginning to have a huge impact, whether it's elections, whether it's elected officials and how they're being held accountable for how their governments operate. Right, in the United States, for example, whenever there's a snowstorm, mayors in any given city know that they must respond. Right, in the past, because there wasn't as much transparency, there wasn't as much sort of a feedback loop, so they could get away with not plowing certain streets. Right, and today you can't. People are tweeting, they're on Facebook, they're sharing GPS-enabled pictures. So this amazing pressure where your customers are online holding you accountable, I think the same thing is going on. And I think what you're going to see is a set of leaders who are not responsive to their constituents are not going to be able to survive. And you're going to see people who are online, they're actually broadcasting their grievances, they're broadcasting their dreams and aspirations. They're going to hold these political leaders accountable. And I think the leaders in New South Wales have done a phenomenal job in terms of showing us the future, showing us what's possible. And I think it's incumbent upon everybody else to follow that leadership.
A lot of it is just about thinking differently, isn't it? The innovation is really figuring out ways that you can do things and revisit structures that you put in place. You have talked previously about breaking them down and building them up again. Is this a big ask for most government organizations?
Well, I would say that it's not just about thinking differently, right? Because, governments around the world are littered with amazing strategies, right? I think ultimately it comes down to execution. And too often what happens is people in government overthink the problem. They overanalyze. They put together massive panels and committees on transforming customer service. It's not rocket science, right? Your citizens want to make sure that their experience when they're dealing with the government is not as arcane as it is today. They want to make sure that in the same way they can go online and order a book and it shows up, or make a reservation to their favorite restaurant, or buy a ticket to anywhere in the world in a matter of seconds. Why can't they have that experience with government services? They want to make sure when they walk into a government office, they're greeted, they're welcomed, and they don't have to be channeled through silos of bureaucracy. And that's not asking a lot, right? And I guarantee you, if you went to any government organization, they'll tell you they have a one-stop strategy, right? Well, great. Where's the execution? How do you make sure you deliver against that vision? And what I would say is, instead of having government officials write yet another strategy, they should go visit the New South Wales Service Center and learn from that and just replicate and execute it. Or they should go and visit the most compelling private sector organizations around customer service and close the technology gap.
Well, the answer to the question, why can't they do it, would have been 5 years ago, because we're the government. But obviously that doesn't fly anymore, as you're saying. But that said, there's still quite a large legislative framework, a lot of governance requirements. I mean, the government is under more scrutiny than ever. Can we reconcile this need to innovate and to treat people nicely and all these things that we don't associate with government? Can we reconcile that with the requirements around record keeping, for example, around sovereignty of your data, control of data, security, all these things that government is very acutely aware of, and still be able to drive that progress that we need to?
I think those are excuses that a lot of government officials will use, right? Because I remember every time we would push government agencies to execute, one of the things I used to say is no new budget and no new legislation. How do we deliver, right? It's sort of changing the way you approach the problem, because the easiest thing, and frankly in IT especially, what most CIOs are known as is Dr. No CIOs, because they say no to everything, right? Therefore, what you're seeing even in government is shadow IT in some cases is far greater than government IT, because government employees are going to other systems that are friendlier, that are operating, right, in a more efficient way than how government systems operate.
Certainly, a lot of the early cloud companies have been very good beneficiaries of that. People just find things a little bit easier, and they want the control, and they want it now, basically, which is, I think, a problem that every CIO is facing in the public sector. So when you look back, obviously you're looking back at the government from a commercial role now, and you're talking with them as customers and as people who are trying to make this change. What advice do you offer them? And I guess, how would you draw on your experience as a CIO at basically the highest profile position that you could be as a public sector CIO to really encourage them and motivate them to take that step and to move forward to the cloud, to open data, to all the things that really are required for the government to function better?
I would simply put it in terms of recognize why you're in the role you're in. You're there to make sure that the citizen is at the heart of government operations. And too many government leaders forget that. They forget who they work for. And I think it's very important to recognize that when you're a public servant, that if every decision you're making is in the interest of how do I optimize, simplify, improve the citizen experience, things will be a lot easier. People get caught up in the politics, they get caught up in legacy IT, they get caught up in things they don't need to be caught up in. I still remember one of the IT projects we were working on, and this was with the U.S. Customs and Immigration Service, right? And we basically said, well, why is it that when somebody applies for a visa or a green card, they don't know what their status is, right? They don't know if they're supposed to get a fingerprint, an interview, where they are in the processing cycle, what the average times are in terms of the next step that they can expect to hear back on. When you look at packaging companies or postal services like Australia Post or FedEx or U.S. Postal Service, they can tell you where your package is on a real-time basis. And the response was, well, we have this billion-dollar IT project, and in 5 years, we'll be able to do that. By just having a conversation with the agency and saying, no, you need to be able to deliver in 90 days. Focus on what your customers need, right? In 90 days, what we're able to deliver is actually a solution that allowed anybody that had filed for a visa or a green card to be able to see on a real-time basis, where they were in the process. Not only that, but they could also see average processing times by field office, whether it was in New York or in Houston or in San Francisco. And that wasn't a function of spending more money or getting new legislation or worrying about security. It was a function of what is it that our customers want. And too many government agencies don't focus on that.
Thank you very much, Vivek. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.